Hello, psychology students. Mrs. Olson here. Today's lesson is titled Dissociative and Somatoform Disorders. Your learning target reads that you will be able to define and identify characteristics of dissociative and somatoform disorders. Now, before we get into learning about both of these categories of disorders, make sure that you have note-taking capabilities ready to go. Okay, so we are going to start with an overview of somatoform disorders and begin with the definition, which reads that a person appears to experience a sudden loss of memory or change in identity. They dissociate, they separate from who they actually are. So we're going to talk about the differences in some of these disorders, but some people experience a complete loss of memory and they take on a change in identity, or there's going to be another one that has a few more characteristics within this definition. Okay, the description. There's a situation in their life that becomes overwhelmingly stressful. If I were taking notes, I might underline this part here. Overwhelmingly stressful, and the person dissociates themselves from it. So we might consider it traumatic, although it doesn't necessarily have to be traumatic. It's going to, the word that is most applicable here for dissociative disorders is that it is stressful. So stress is relative to each person, but that person who has a dissociative disorder, something stressful has happened in their life, and they are trying to separate themselves from what's going on. Okay? Now, it becomes a disorder when the symptoms are severe and prolonged. So prolonged, of course, means that it lasts a long time, or it lasts longer than what experts are going to consider normal. Okay? So the first one is sometimes labeled as DID, or dissociative identity disorder. Okay, and we're going to break down the definition here a little bit. It's when two or more distinct identities alternately control the person's behavior. So they dissociate, they separate from who they actually are, and they take on different personalities that actually control their thought process, their movements, the way that they talk, okay? So there's memory impairment there. The memory impairment refers to when that person takes on this other identity or these other identities. They don't remember who the original person is. Okay? So, before it was labeled dissociative identity disorder, it was called multiple personality disorder. In fact, some people still call it that. So if it helps you to remember, you can have that in your head, but when you're talking about the disorder, this is what it is labeled as now. Okay? All right, so each personality has its own voice and mannerisms. Like I said before, it's a completely different person within the original person, okay? What they have found with some of these people that have DID is handedness. So whether they are left-handed or right-handed, it can switch with each personality. And there's actually a study that's been done on someone that has been diagnosed with DID, and they detected shifting visual acuity and eye muscle balance as the patients switched. So another way to think about this, because it's kind of using some fancy words here, shifting visual acuity, that means that the person that they actually studied in this particular study, she could not see very well as the original person. In fact, she was considered legally blind, if you can get this. But when she turned into one of her 6-year-old personalities, she could see objects around her very clearly. She described, the sky being blue, the trees that she could see out the window, the green grass in the lawn, things like that. And when she was the original person, she could only see outlines of objects. Very, very interesting. Okay, so in popular culture, in the media, so this is a TV show, and some of you may have seen it. This is I think it was on HBO, and yeah, it's HBO, and it was called The United States of Terra. So might want to look it up. I've never seen it actually, but I've had many students tell me that they have watched it, enjoyed it when they figured out what DID was. Okay, so one study of murderers diagnosed with DID found that 11 out of 12 of those had suffered severe torturous child abuse, and psychologists determined that the reason why the murderers, the patients, had developed these different identities was to help their minds, their memories deal with what they had endured as children. So not a justification for what they did, but some people say that it helps explain why they did what they did. Okay, this note reads that perhaps the multiple personalities are a desperate effort of the traumatized to detach from horrific experiences or existence. So there are scientists, other psychologists who say that there are other people in the world that experience similar situations and they don't turn into murderers and they don't develop DID. So here I am presenting you with the information. You can make your own educated opinion. Okay. Some say that DID is manufactured by the person and or the therapist, and sometimes law enforcement is blamed for the way that they ask the questions to the criminals, and the criminals are able to, I'll use the word manufacture, make up these different identities as a way to explain away their behavior. Okay. So here's an infographic. It is titled, Is DID Just a Fad? The number of cases and articles concerning DID by the decade. So go ahead and pause here if you want to look a little bit longer on it. At it, I wanted to present you with the statistics. Okay. Our next one is titled Dissociative Amnesia. So the definition of dissociative amnesia is disruptions or breakdowns in memory, or consciousness or awareness. Okay, so they forget who they are, they forget personal information, and they separate from who they are, what their experiences are, what's in their memory, their family, their friends, their jobs, things like that. So here is kind of an easier way to remember. They forget who they are. It's usually associated with a traumatic event, somebody who develops dissociative amnesia. And this is an amnesia. This is a memory loss that goes beyond normal forgetting. So everybody forgets details along the way in their life, okay? It just happens. Maybe those details aren't important. Maybe they just weren't that big of a deal to a person. But this type of memory loss is going beyond what is normal forgetting. Okay, so here I said it's not the same as simple amnesia, and even though this is a little bit funny of a way to explain it, this is what some experts in the field call the distinction between simple amnesia and dissociative amnesia. So simple amnesia is characterized as head injury or trauma to the brain. Okay, so that's kind of your regular old amnesia, if you will, and it's different than dissociative amnesia. So somebody who develops dissociative amnesia, it's not necessarily that they've been in a car accident or that their head has been hit hard the wrong way. It's that they've experienced something that is considered traumatic. Okay, so just pictures to help us reinforce the idea of dissociative amnesia. They forget everything about themselves. Okay, and our last one is titled Dissociative Fugue. So the definition here is that the person temporarily loses their sense of personal identity, and this is what makes it different from dissociative amnesia. They travel away from their homes or places of work. So think of this one as amnesia plus leaving, okay? Sometimes this fugue state, it lasts for hours. They have actually found people who have left their life completely. They were considered a missing person. They have left for years. Okay? Outwardly, they show no signs of illness, strange behavior, or strange appearance or odd behavior. They actually remember who they are. Let's pretend that they have a college degree or they have a specific skill set. Those things they actually remember, but they don't remember personal details. They don't remember their childhood. They don't remember their families. They don't remember what made them them. So they show up in a different city, they show up in a different state, and essentially they start a whole new life. Okay, so these pictures are just to help us remember the ideas behind or the characteristics of dissociative fugue. This split or this separation from who they actually are. Some people get on transportation and they leave. I've actually read a news story about a bride who essentially got cold feet. This was this stressful event in her life, and she didn't want to marry the guy that she was going to marry. She disappeared I think it was a few weeks, not a few days, but a few weeks before her wedding. There was this massive manhunt that went out to find her. They actually found her keys, her purse, and her apartment, but they didn't find her. And I think it was a year later that she resurfaced. Law enforcement found her, and she was living in a different state with a whole new life, and they kind of had to reintegrate her back into her family. Story goes, she never married the guy. Okay. We are going to stop here for a moment just for a break, and I'll meet you in part 2.